everybody. Welcome to the Risk and Resilience Forum. I'm very lucky to be joined by some great guests. We have Raza Zaidi from our sponsors, Avetta. He's Director of Sales and Client Success, EMEA at Avetta, of course. Martin Hornzith, Sustainability Intelligence Strategist at SEDEX. Carolyn Park, VP of Supply Chain Optimization for RS Group. And Sam De Freitas, Vice President Procurement at Mars. We're going to start off, Raza, I know you're going to give us a little presentation on why it's so critical to put risk and resilience at the heart of your procurement strategy.
Sure. Do you mind if I stand up?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Take a few minutes here. Well, thank you, everyone. Good morning. First off, it's a pleasure to be here at Supply Chain Procurement Supply Chain Live, and Avetta is very proud to sponsor this talk around building a more safer, sustainable, and resilient supply chain. So let me start by setting the scene of why it's so important to have a resilient supply chain at this moment in time. Businesses are seeing extreme volatility when it comes to supply chain, and this volatility is coming in very different shapes and forms. So we had the pandemic, we've got natural disasters, we've got cybersecurity threats, we've got a change in landscape in legislation, both from a sustainability and environment point of view, and staying ahead of that can be difficult, and that filters into your supply chain, because at the end of the day, they're an extension of your business, right? So ensuring that they are resilient and can support you in your operations is extremely important, right? A recent KPMG study, actually 4 months ago, showed that supply chain risk management is a top 6 trend. It was named number 2 across large businesses, and CEOs and C-levels and executives are looking at that. So when you talk about supply chain risk management, it's extremely important to have a dedication to this risk, ensure that your supply chains are resilient. And it's also around new risks such as generative AI as well that's coming about. So that's bringing in security concerns from a data privacy point of view, data management point of view as well. And this can't be done on its own, right? So you have to rely on, number 1, people, and number 2, technology. So it's leaders are now looking at, when they're looking at supply chain resilience, they're looking at a predictive rather than reactive process. So essentially, how can I understand my supply chain's capability, competency, and capacity to really ensure I have got either plan A, plan B, plan C's in place. And I was just speaking to our esteemed colleagues here around, it's not just about procurement in isolation now as well. This goal and this objective has to be shared across the business. That's why I said it starts with people as well. So you have to break silos from procurement, safety, IT, ESG, sustainability. All of these folks have an extremely complex task, especially procurement, because they have to wear different hats now. But we have to break that silo between departments. So, like I said, to mitigate that risk, you have to use technology. And when you're using technology, it's about big data and insights into that. So when you're capturing risk management data from your supply chain, it's leveraging that data to make educated, informed decisions. So technology, the way I see it, is a force multiplier for resilience. And platforms like Avetta, what we do is we take fragmented manual processes where things may live in different Excel sheets, on emails, in a filing cabinet, and we digitalize all of that, and we try to help businesses move away from lagging indicators to more leading indicators, so you can be more predictive, essentially. So just a little bit about that. We're supporting over 500 clients globally, and we have got about 130,000 different contractors all on the platform. So our unique vantage point is that data and that insight. So we can look at trends, we can identify, like I said, the compliance capability and capacity of your supply chain, so you can have those informed decisions at your fingertips, and it's all live data. And that's really what you need to ensure you have a resilient supply chain. And this is, like I said, because we have to break these silos, it's not just about price and availability of products. It's about safety, sustainability, cybersecurity, ESG as well. So you can collect all of that, and if you've got a platform where you can have a single source of truth, that's essentially what that's a lever to be more resilient. Why it's important as well, it's not just about continuing operations. It's about sometimes brand reputation, shareholder price, and in some cases we saw recently with the cyber attacks, it's about national security, right? So it's a public airports that got affected. So this goes far beyond your own internal business. It can actually affect wider operations as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Lots to think about. We'll be covering some of that in more depth as we get into this interview. But Martine, first of all, how your thoughts on that? What do you think are the biggest risks at the moment that we should be concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a lot there. I think in terms of, I think a huge thing is uncertainty at the moment, and I think it's not new, it's not going anywhere. I think, like you said, Raza, whether it's geopolitical uncertainty, legislative risk, you don't know what they look like, but also technology is always changing, so it also means that you don't know what it's going to look like in the future. And you're also making that investment up front. You don't know how that's going to look in the future. So kind of how do you approach that now and make sure that then your future plans are resilient? I mean, working at SEDEX, we come from the kind of human rights risk standpoint and also environmental. I think if we're looking internally in supply chains, kind of going, I guess, into detail straight away, but a lot of the risks we're seeing when it comes to people in your supply chains are around working conditions, whether the conditions are safe and hygienic for workers, which is by far the leading risk when it comes to people, alongside kind of wages and working hours. And I mean, they're all indicators of forced labour as well, which is also then a huge risk. And I think when you start compounding these different things, it's kind of these risks then materialise operationally, they materialise reputationally, they can have huge impacts on your brand. And also when it comes to kind of legislation and compliance, there's risks around kind of what penalties might you face if you're not compliant. So yeah, I think the main thing would be the uncertainty piece, but then also kind of looking more inwards in your supply chain and knowing kind of what those risks are, both to your business and people, planet, which I'm sure you've heard a million times before, and kind of how can you tackle all of those in the best way, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
Carolyn, how do you think the definition of resilience has changed in the last 5 years?
I think with we talked about the growing geopolitical pressures, the people aspect, that everything's just coming more to the forefront at the moment. And for RS Group, we're a global distributor. Probably the most important thing that we're looking at from a resilience point of view, as well as all of the things we talked about, but to bring something else in, is around not having over-reliance on one particular source. So what's really important for us at the moment is building a robust, resilient, sustainable network that allows us to flex as and when things happen. That unpredictability that you talked about, it gives us the opportunity to flex as we need to.
And Sam, on the definition of resilience, what would you say?
I mean, I look at as well risk and resilience in the space of two horizons. You've got your long-term resilience, which actually probably links more to a sustainability agenda. If you take those risks, we need to have a resilient strategy that thinks about how do we improve the resilience of our supply chain over generations. If you take a company like Mars, we buy a lot of materials from developed countries, and things like cocoa, palm oils, that sort of thing. We need to make sure that is resilient for multiple generations. They require focus, to reduce carbon. They require focus to improve soil health, to actually also improve the livelihoods of the individuals working in those locations. And they take multi-generation and action today. The second horizon is the near term, which is far more dynamic, and we just talked about, you can ream off a long list of potential risks. And the key in that space is just being really focused on knowing where you stand today. So you need to have complete transparency of your supply chain so that you can be agile and adapt where you need to. If you're single source, make sure you need to be multiple source, as an example. So for there, what Mars has there is a digital twin. So we understand our supply chain down to the tier N. So if something does happen, we're not spending weeks trying to figure out what the impact's going to be. We know exactly where that vulnerability is, and then we can take some action.
That was going to be my next question. In fact, I was going to ask Caroline, because you talked about the evolving landscape. Do you think companies are evolving quickly enough to cope with all that's coming down the chain?
I think increasingly, you talked about the risk and the resilience and the understanding growing in the last 5 years. I think the big organisations are. I think you can see it, and you talked to it. We equally have a digital twin and do a lot of that modelling. I think one of the areas we focus on in RS Group is around working with our suppliers and supporting our suppliers with that as well. So we have a supplier handbook, we share what we expect of our suppliers, but we also work with them to support them with that. So where you've got maybe smaller organisations that are not maybe yet ready, I think it's an incumbent, and we see it incumbent on us to help them to progress to make the whole supply chain much more resilient. Yeah.
Because their weakness is your weakness, ultimately.
Exactly that, yes.
Yes. So, Raza, sorry, I didn't stick my back to you, but how do you go about spotting those risks before they become a serious disruption?
So I think it's one of the things that you've mentioned as well is going down into that tier N. That's another big risk, because there's these interdependencies that you have across your supply chain. So you number one, need to increase that visibility, right? And how you do that is either through some sort of software or some sort of platform of some sort. So you need to, number one, increase that visibility and have that transparency, as Sam mentioned. But then, like I said, you have to also understand their capability and capacity as well. What do they have in place? Because a lot of these organizations as well, if you take Mars, I'm sure you're a global business. Your suppliers in the UK may be very resilient versus your suppliers in an emerging market may not be so resilient. So how are we educating them, and how are we also supporting them? But and then at the same time is, once we understand that capability and capacity, how do we use that data to try and identify trends, risks, and you can use that through, with the launch of AI, you can really analyze a huge amount of data in a matter of minutes, really. So capturing that transparency in the data from your supply chain, going down to the tier N, and then using the data once you've understood that to try and identify weak spots, and then support that supply chain in educating them as well.
So I was reading the government's cybersecurity survey for 2025. It said only 14% of British businesses review their security risks of their immediate suppliers, and only half of that, 7%, for the wider supply chain. So how concerned are you about that?
I think kind of the first point is there's a huge lack of understanding of what your supply chain looks like. And I think, you just mentioned it, I think if you don't know who your suppliers are and where they're based and what processes they have in place to mitigate risk, it's a really, that's the first step. And I think that when you're, once you have the understanding of where your suppliers are and kind of even at a high level understanding where your risks are, so that you're then more able to prioritize your efforts as well, because I think any company, you're not able to tackle all risks at all times and be resilient from every single angle, but it's kind of knowing where are your biggest risks. Is it security? Is it human rights and the environment, or other operational risks and climate risk, whatever it might be, knowing what they look like so that you can say, okay, well, we know this is where the highest risks are. So that's the first step in saying, okay, well, then when we develop our approach and our strategy, we're taking that into account and really focusing our resources where it matters most. So in that case, might be security.
Yeah. So supplier relationships, obviously, a big part of this. How do you work with them to minimise the risk, and what approach works best for you?
I think that's one. It's a huge thing. I think with data, you mentioned data and people is two of the main things that companies need in their approach. And I think when you're working with suppliers, the first thing is, do you have a vision and view of your own business, and do you also have a vision for your business in the future? Because when you're working with suppliers and communicating expectations, how are you meant to communicate clearly with them if you don't even know what you stand for as a business? How are you addressing risks? How do you expect suppliers to address their risk and kind of cascade that down the supply chain? So I think having a really clear strategy and vision from the outset is really important. I think always making sure that it might sound obvious, but having a trusting relationship with your suppliers, having mechanisms in place that they can raise issues early on and not be afraid to come to you, because having those kind of early warning systems, whether it's a grievance mechanism or having a direct contact within your business that they can go to, if you're in a position where they feel they can come to you and talk about that, it might seem, it's more human. I think it's in a world of data and having that risk picture through data, that's so important, but it's also, you can't do that without the people. The data comes from somewhere. People are having to be involved in the process. So, that kind of circles back to Raz's point at the beginning.
Sam, what are your thoughts on that? How do you approach it?
On cyber, specifically? I think it's a fantastic question, because if I think about our risk register, I think not many have a specific observation there's a potential risk, and that even worse, do we have an action plan, a business continuity plan about it? So I think that's a really good point. In our business, we purchase about 400 materials that go into our confectionery business, and only it takes one of those not to arrive, and we don't have tens of $1 million of revenue lost every day. And so what we actually do is we segment all our materials, and then we segment the types of risks that we might be facing for each of those materials. Cyber does feature on some of those, logistics being a good example, IT and so forth. But I did make me think just now, okay, but what about my dairy supply chain? We've got many business continuity plans for if dairy doesn't arrive or it doesn't go through our normal processing channels. And we run them and test them. But actually, what if the computers just don't switch on that day? Or what if they have to do a Marks and Spencer's and shut down for 2 weeks, right? And I think it's a fantastic example where, well, actually, let's go and run that scenario. So to go right back to what was just discussed earlier, having visibility is one thing. We've got many, many tools. We're best of breed when it comes to every sort of listening device that we can have out there. Digital twins, actually it was a home-built system that we had to build, but again, fantastic tool. We don't string them together very well. And I think what you need to do in that scenario is, okay, what if there's a cyber attack in this part of our supply chain? Where would we be most vulnerable? And what would be the business continuity plan? Now, the beauty about AI, and you might come back to later, is we can run many of those scenarios very, very fast now, and we can spot the red spots. So I think, for me, that's probably the next step in the journey, is not just get the capability, but then actually run the scenario, find where you're most vulnerable, and then think about what your business continuity plan will be. And then you also asked a question about suppliers, and that one for me is fundamental. So we have a broadcast to our suppliers every 6 months, and I remember doing the first one, we said, look, 4 things you need to worry about: sustainability, value leadership, innovation, and resilience. And what was brilliant after that session was immediately I got emails from suppliers saying, look, did you know you might be multi-source, but the origin is coming from the same space. What are we going to do about it? Did you know we've got a cybersecurity plan? It was amazing to start seeing actually the suppliers being proactive and owning the resilience strategy with us.
Carolyn, how do you strike a balance between designing this resilience, introducing all this tech, and keeping the cost sensible?
Yeah, great question. And for a supply chain leader, that's kind of one of our biggest challenges at the moment. So we work all the time operationally to try and drive the cost element and improve. So recent things we've been doing is looking at our transport provision, moving from using air to road to try and keep costs down, but also help our sustainability. So constantly looking at that from a supply chain angle. And we also have a number of tools in the business, as Sam has talked about, where we can model and what-if scenario. So we can actually look at that supply chain and look at it both from a cost, supply chain, resilience, sustainability element, and kind of choose our balance. The other thing that I touched on, but is really important to us, is supporting our suppliers. So that balance of the cost and the risk, and what I talked about is our suppliers want help largely, and they work very collaboratively with us to kind of manage that dynamic. So constant balance, I guess, is what we're saying all the time. But data, I agree, is critical to all of that.
Do you mind if I quickly, Bill, because you asked specifically, how do you balance the cost? It's actually a really easy business case, easier than saving money. Because if you shut a factory in Mars, you're costing tens of $1 millions per day. So, I think there's a quote I use often in Mars, and I've got a couple of Martians in my team here, so they get sick of me saying it, but rather than scare people into resilience, saying, oh, this could happen, we need to be worried, I excite them and I show them a picture of a Formula 1 car from Ayrton Senna, and a quote, and some of you might have heard it, which is, it's really hard to overtake 15 cars when it's sunny, but it's easy when it's wet. And the reason I say that is, if we are ahead of the game, we can get products to shelves faster than our competitors. And so for me, justifying why we need to invest in a digital twin, or why we need to have all these subscriptions to the listing devices, or why we need to actually sometimes spend a lot of time and money reformulating products with our suppliers, it's quite straightforward. If you can really simplify it, though, there's only 5 big risks we need to worry about because of the highest impact, the highest likelihood, and sometimes quite expensive to mitigate, but they will be really impactful. For me, that's a quite easy business case. So there's one more metric I think all procurement departments need to have, and that is sales at risk. We have savings, we have cash, we have profit margin, etc. But if we have sales at risk, you'll quickly realize you can run your business highly profitably, but it only takes one thing to go wrong and it disappears. And I think I get inspired when I see procurement teams have general managers own that target with them. I think that's where we need to go next.
And Raza, where are you on cost versus resilience?
No, it's a good point, and I mean, I echo what Sam just said. It shouldn't be about cost. This is now becoming a competitive advantage. All of these regulations coming out, all of these resilience things that you want to implement, it's now allowing you to become more competitive within the market. So don't see it as a cost. See it as, I'm investing in my future, and I'm investing in becoming more competitive, not only to within my industry, but also customers are now demanding this. There's the social pressure to be more sustainable, but that comes at a cost, right? There is shareholders that want this. There's board of directors that are saying, what are you doing around sustainability, paying like the living wage, for example, and things like that. And people, like some of my clients that have said, Avetta or Raza, can you help us capture this from our supply chain? Why? Because they are being asked this in tenders now. What are you doing around it? So again, it's not about, hey, it's going to cost me this much. It's about what could you potentially lose if you don't implement this.
Indeed. Now, we've talked about all the risks and the fact that they're coming our way thick and fast and people can hardly cope. What do you see as the potential risks of the next few years? What's the biggest thing that you've got to worry about?
I think uncertainty will continue, like it is here already, obviously. I think from a climate perspective, obviously that's a huge risk, and it's whether that's in your supply chains. I mean, it could be at any stage. It could be at crop level and the impact on crop yields as a result of climate change, or our manufacturing facilities being disrupted because of climate change or flooding, whatever it might be, or transport routes might have to adapt. So I think having to adapt to those risks is huge. It's not an optional anymore, and I think probably a broken record at this point. I think everyone's drilled into them that climate is important. But yeah, I think it's just continuing to make sure that our strategies take on that. I think I'm just going to go around in circles here because I think it's going to continue with uncertainty. And I think to me that's just
Can I just build on that? Because I think
of course.
for us, that convergence of the climate risk, the costs we talked about, and the regulatory pressures and the geopolitical that's coming, that is the balance, and all of that and different bits of that are going to pop up in over the next few years. But it's being able to respond to all of that holistically is where we've got to be.
Sam, I can see you nodding.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've slowly. I thought it was just make sure you're multi-sourced and just get a digital model together. We'll fix it, and then you don't get coconut one year. And we've had a huge issue with trying to source cocoa, another challenge for us. And previous years it's been sugar and so on. And you realise just how interconnected these problems are. You can blame the weather. Definitely blame the weather. Climate is a huge challenge, and frankly, the solutions to that though are down on farms. All right, they're down at the origins, and the solutions there aren't just Mars playing a role in investing in improving soil health or lowering water usage or improving some of the incomes. Actually, it's the role of everybody in the ecosystem. So government, they educate people, right? They also regulate. And I think as industries, as Mars will stand alongside our competitors, we need to form a point of view on who should be doing what. So I think the coming years, it's no longer a long-term horizon that I described earlier. It's happening now. And I think it takes like cross-industry, cross-sector investment. I was with European Commission just recently, and we talked about dairy supply chains, and I was sitting alongside dairy suppliers, processors, universities, and also government officials, and I'm saying you've got to get money you've got to get science, that's where it starts, you've got to get that money in science to farms, to families. We're just going to make it as quickly as simple as possible. right? And today it's got to happen. So I don't believe we can we can find the vulnerabilities, but we can't lower the world temperature overnight on our own. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how it comes together.
And Raza, I could hear you nodding behind me, or
Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't
giving
help myself, but
affirmative.
no, I agree. I think one of the biggest risks that I see from my clients is increasing that transparency and going further down into your supply chain. Because, like Sam said, it starts at the farm, it starts right at the root, right? But the challenge you have there is, again, you'll have emerging markets, right? So different maturity levels, but also if you think about it, Mars and other hiring clients, they're large multinational organizations that have the resources and the budget and the power to go ahead and implement these things. Your supply chain are SMEs. And there's an EU commission that is just recently updated. 99% of all businesses in Europe are SMEs. So they've got less than 250 employees and less than all. So how are we enabling them? How are we helping them, right? And it starts with understanding the capability, maturity levels, preparedness. And then I think all of us have that responsibility to educate them as well and help them become more resilient and, help them understand.
Absolutely. Well, I'm hoping that there might be some questions from the floor. Can I see any hands up? Aha, great. Have we got a microphone coming down this way? Thank you, Izzy.
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm coming from Liquiditas. Great that we all want to help SMEs, smaller companies mainly. I have one question. How the procurement teams see the early implementation of early payment programs, supply chain financing, together with treasurers, in order to help suppliers to be more sustainable and resilient in financing part. We know that they struggle with longer payment terms, also unlocked working capital, their pressure with the longer payment terms. So you procurement guys are negotiating them. So what is your view on implementation of supply chain financing and early payment programs for your suppliers? And is there anything that you are working on it with your teams, or you have any kind of view? It's not financing the topic, but it's something that also helps supply in order for them to keep the resilience and sustainability. Thank you.
Am I sensing you, Rosie?
Anyone. You can.
I mean,
all those three.
From our side, from a Veta point of view, again, we're a software company that helps with supply chain risk management, right? So the first thing that we do is we have got a business risk solution within our platform. Is integrated where it sources publicly available third-party information around the financial stability of that business, and you can look at average contract values, the payment terms that they, how do they pay, all of those things. So again, I think if the first thing, it starts with data, but I think I'll leave it to my peers here to talk about what they implement
real
in the
quick,
business.
Mars has a supply chain financing program. It's extremely well adopted for our suppliers, and SMEs likewise leverage it. It's quite a mature program, actually, so I guess it's not about renovating that. The opportunity I see in it, though, is maybe extending it a bit more to not just providing the finance or supporting with finance and solutions, actually is making it more linked to the business goals we're trying to achieve as well. And it's something we have had ongoing conversations with various providers. How can we give more incentives to you and better terms on supply chain financing if there are certain sustainability goals that get achieved. And I think that'll be quite an interesting dynamic. And we've seen some programs like that, but that's where I'd like to maybe see it evolve. So we start connecting some of these risks as well.
Would you like to add any more?
Not for me.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Heading on down with the microphone.
Shout
If
it
you
out,
can
yeah.
project, then yeah.
Hello, my name is Laszlo. I'm from Inspectorial, a supply chain resilience and risk software provider. I want to reflect on one of the things that Sam, you mentioned, that risk to sales. That's a really interesting question. How do you link, or how do you do the data connection in between the supplier risk, the product risk, potential delivery risk, to have a holistic risk view? on your business.
So this was the myth that I wanted to crack in the first 3 years at Mars. I've been here nearly 7 years, but that you can't connect the factory data to your supply chain data. Of course you can. You have an MRP system. So the fantastic visibility that we had in part one of building our digital twin was, okay, so what are the materials that go into the factories? What's your production schedule? What products are they making? And what's the cost, the forecast and sales of each one? Hook it together. It's that simple. So when you don't get a certain material, a color, red color, and pick it, right, and that doesn't arrive, you can then instantly now know, okay, how much safety stock do I have of the color? How much? What's my production schedule? What's my finished good inventory? And then what's the day by which, if I don't get the red color, that I don't have products going out to customers? And then what's my cost per day? So you get two things: a date and a loss of sales impact. Now, if you don't have egg, that goes in all our nougat bars. So big impact. If you don't get red, you might then say, let's take some red M&Ms out of our bags and maybe adjust it. But for the key is hooking it together. The most exciting bit is if you run that vulnerability across all your materials. What if I don't have red? What if I don't have blue? What if I don't have mint flavors? And you can, if you just accelerate how fast you run that, you spot exactly where you're going to get impacted the most. Where you're running just in time, coconut was like that 6 months ago, versus where you've got plenty of safety stock in some other areas. So I think it's just wiring that data together. Not easy, but once you've figured it out, it's hugely impactful. And it stops all the internal conversations about what should we do about it is important. Well, you know straight away, together, looking with the R&D, your supply chain team, your sales team, what you need to be focusing on.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did you want to add anything? No?
No, that sounds fascinating.
Any other questions? Yes, there's one just behind. Is the microphone gone?
Sam, I'm going to put you on the radar again. You've been bringing up cocoa a lot. So West
Talk about the
Africa,
cost of cocoa.
right? West Africa perhaps, or LATAM, or some APAC countries, you have supply coming up. But you and your brothers and sisters in your competitive industry are all looking for that same cocoa that you are. Single source happens to be a key challenge for the industry. We happen to be in the biotech industry where not just single source, but sole source suppliers become a big risk. And of course, inventory is a mitigation strategy you can deploy, which helps. However, at some point, it only takes a couple of storms, and then it all goes away. So we talked about supplier management, but we haven't heard a lot about supplier development. Is that an area that you guys have touched or worked on to kind of give you some additional resilience? And if so, that's the one that takes a long time. You talked about multi-generational impact. Can you talk a little bit about what your strategy is there?
I think that's a fantastic point. So you're right. Safety stock's normally our buffering solution. Well, I say, take us 6 months to figure it out, so let's put 6 months inventory in or something. But the cocoa is a multi-generation opportunity, challenge, but a massive opportunity for the world. And it's not just cocoa. There's a few other ingredients that we source that are in a similar boat. Now, for us, it's around getting to the science and connecting the science to the bulk of our supply chain. So we do partner with our suppliers, and we have joint investment programs on thinking about, okay, is it an origin we need to develop? LATAM could be a great origin. Let's think about, I know Mondelez is being pretty clear, it's invested in LATAM as an opportunity. Technology, so cocoa butter equivalents, for example, and where can you push some of the limits of that, and will the consumer know and care about it? So yeah, we have a number of programs, not on just the origin development, but also the reformulation development. And that's in partnership with a handful of strategic suppliers. And I guess the most exciting bit is we have a partnership with a company called Unreasonable Food. And you might see my boss, Amanda Davis, post some things on LinkedIn about this, where we're partnering with startups and then hooking them up with parts of our supply chain, so that we can then say, here's a bit of science that could be really impactful. You've got the scale, and let's together have an impact on reformulating or maybe even developing new origins or farming practices and so forth.
Well, developing suppliers seems to be one of the themes that's come out of this discussion, and I'm sure that it will continue through the next couple of days. But thank you to the panel, to Sam, Carolyn, Martine, and Raza. And thank you all for listening. We've got to take a break now, and we'll be back again at 12:15. So please take the opportunity to network, and I'm sure these chaps will be outside if you want to ask them any more questions. But thank you very much for now.